The room went silent the moment the little girl reached for the elegant woman in the navy coat. Security stepped forward. Parents gasped. A volunteer whispered, "Ma'am, do you know her?" Before anyone could pull the child away, the single dad placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder and said only 4 quiet words. "She's with me." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be, because the woman everyone assumed was a stranger slowly turned, looked at him with trembling eyes, and nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "I am." For several stunned seconds, nobody understood what they had just witnessed. Neither did Daniel Harper. Daniel never expected to spend Saturday morning at the Lakeside Children's Art Festival. As a widowed construction worker, weekends usually meant fixing broken fences for neighbors or taking extra roofing jobs to pay for 11-year-old Emma's piano lessons. But Emma had won second place in the city's youth watercolor contest, and she wanted her dad there. Nothing else mattered. Daniel arrived wearing dusty work boots, jeans still stained with drywall dust, and the same faded blue flannel he'd worn for years. Most parents looked polished. He looked exhausted. Still, Emma smiled the moment she spotted him. That smile always made every 12-hour shift worthwhile. The festival was crowded with local artists, teachers, reporters, and community donors. One donor attracted more attention than anyone else. Her name was Claire Bennett. She had quietly funded children's hospitals, libraries, and art programs across the county for years. She rarely attended public events. Today was one of those rare appearances. Reporters surrounded her. Volunteers carefully managed every step she took. She smiled politely, but something about her expression seemed distant, as if she were carrying a weight no one else could see. Daniel noticed it only because he recognized that same look in the mirror every morning. The look of someone still learning how to live with loss. Emma wandered through the student gallery while Daniel stayed back, admiring her confidence. Then something unexpected happened. Emma stopped in front of Claire. Without hesitation, she held out a folded paper crane. "My dad says people who look lonely should never leave empty-handed." Claire froze. The tiny paper bird rested gently in her hands. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't perfect. Its wings were slightly uneven. But Claire stared at it, as though someone had handed her an entire lifetime. For the first time that morning, her carefully rehearsed smile disappeared. Real emotion replaced it. A photographer rushed closer. Security followed. One guard instinctively stepped between Claire and the child. Emma looked frightened. Daniel immediately crossed the room. He wasn't angry. He simply placed himself beside his daughter. Then came those 4 quiet words. "She's with me." Not because Claire belonged to him, because Emma did. And wherever Emma chose to offer kindness, Daniel would stand beside her. The misunderstanding should have ended there. Instead, Claire surprised everyone. She stepped around security. "I'd like to meet both of you." They shared coffee in a quiet corner after the ceremony. Claire admitted she almost hadn't attended. Exactly 1 year earlier, her younger sister had passed away after a long illness. The festival had been her sister's favorite event. Since then, Claire had buried herself in work and philanthropy, believing helping strangers might somehow fill the silence. It never did, until a little girl handed her a paper crane. Daniel listened more than he spoke. Loss recognized loss. Neither needed many words. Weeks passed. Life returned to normal. Daniel climbed scaffolding before sunrise. Emma practiced piano after school. Claire continued funding community projects. Yet the paper crane stayed on her office desk. Whenever difficult decisions piled up, she looked at its uneven wings. It reminded her that imperfect things could still carry hope. Then another twist arrived. Daniel received devastating news. The apartment building where he and Emma rented had been condemned after structural damage was discovered. Residents had 30 days to leave. Affordable housing in town had nearly vanished. Daniel quietly searched everywhere while working overtime. He never mentioned the problem to Claire. Pride stopped him. Emma accidentally did. Not by asking for help, by mentioning she might have to switch schools because they couldn't find another apartment nearby. Claire said nothing. She simply nodded. A week later, Daniel received a phone call from the local community center. An abandoned teacher residence beside the library had finally completed renovations. A family had withdrawn at the last minute. Would he like to apply? The rent was lower than anything else available. Daniel assumed it was luck. It wasn't. Claire had anonymously donated the restoration funds months earlier without knowing who might eventually live there. Neither of them discovered the connection until much later. Moving day felt like starting over. Emma finally had her own small bedroom. Daniel built bookshelves from leftover lumber after work. Life slowly became lighter. One rainy afternoon, Claire visited with several donated art supplies for neighborhood children. She admired Daniel's handmade shelves. "They're beautiful." He shrugged. "They're straight enough." She laughed for the first time in months. Real laughter, not the polite version cameras usually captured. As autumn arrived, another surprise waited. Emma's school announced a community art exhibition. Students could nominate one adult who inspired their artwork. Parents assumed teachers would win. Some expected firefighters or doctors. Emma chose Claire. Her painting showed two women. One was her late mother, painted from old family photographs. The other was Claire, holding the tiny paper crane beneath a bright blue sky. At the bottom, Emma wrote only one sentence. "Kind people help your heart remember how to smile again." Claire cried before the audience even finished reading it. Daniel quietly looked away, giving her privacy. Sometimes respect is simply knowing when not to interrupt someone else's healing. Months later, the community opened a new children's creative center. The entrance displayed hundreds of colorful paper cranes made by local families. No plaques celebrated wealthy donors. No statues honored important names. Instead, a small wooden sign read, "One act of kindness can become someone else's beginning." Visitors often asked where the idea came from. Nobody mentioned the awkward moment when security had stepped forward. Nobody talked about confusion or embarrassment. They remembered only the paper crane and the quiet father who never demanded attention. The man who simply chose kindness over pride. Years later, Emma would barely remember winning second place at the festival. She would remember something far more valuable. She would remember watching two grieving adults discover that healing doesn't always arrive through grand miracles. Sometimes it walks into your life wearing dusty work boots. Sometimes it folds itself into an imperfect paper bird. And sometimes, all it takes is one quiet sentence. "She's with me." Because the strongest people aren't those who rescue the world. They're the ones who make sure no one has to face it alone.